understand the stack of SAP system. What are all the different components? What does it depend on? What sequences have to happen in? And then what can be automated?
Welcome to the Tekitok podcast, where we embark on a journey through the ever-evolving realm of SAP and IT operations, automation, artificial intelligence, and cloud technologies. Whether you're an IT professional, a business leader, or simply curious about emerging technologies and industry insights, our episodes will be your compass in navigating this dynamic landscape with real-world experiences. Join us as we demystify complex concepts, explore innovative trends, and engage in stimulating dialogue with industry experts to empower you with insights that matter. The views expressed by our hosts and guests are their own and do not reflect the opinions of their respective companies. The producer of this Tekitok podcast assumes no responsibility for any public content, ideas, or recommendations shared.
Morning, good afternoon. Another episode of our Tekitok. Today I'm here with Lynn. It's going to be Lynn and me mano a mano, trying to understand and provide some insights on patching systems and more specifically SAP systems, because we both have probably a century of years of experience patching SAP systems. So there's a lot we can share with everyone. All right, Lynn, no introductions needed for you in this podcast, I guess.
I need to just precursor that, this is October. We are doing this recording, and October is a worldwide cybersecurity awareness month. So we do have a planned episode. I'm going to shamelessly plug that we will talk about cybersecurity as a separate topic. But in cyber, one of the main topics is obviously keeping your systems updated in terms of minimizing the attack surface. That includes also patching, making sure you have vulnerabilities that are known, that are addressed, that should be patched in your primary landscape. So today we're gonna try and tackle the kind of a difficult topic in SAP Patch Management. And this topic has been always the thorn in the side for most customer operations. So let's break it down, like how important is SAP patch automation is or management in the whole scheme of SAP journey, right? So I'm here to exchange ideas and talk about experiences with Jordi. I think, like I say, we probably have both, I think maybe a combined 60 years worth of SAP management experience. We can talk about gray hair. Okay. All right.
All right. Yeah. Keeping SAP up to date, how important is that from a business, from a risk, from a compliance point of view, right? Because my experience has been always, the longer you wait, you're just pushing the can down the road, because you're going to have to patch no matter what at some point. And the bigger the gap, the harder it's going to make. And my idea of patching is, don't make patching a project. Make patching part of your business's processes. It's like doing a backup. Do patching as you do backups. Obviously, doing a backup is a lot simpler, but don't make patching like once a year, big time project, because then it's so disruptive, risky, that in my view has the experience been always trying to stay up to date. And those smaller patches that can be introduced continuously, aligns more with the agile mentality and framework that has been going on in the past few years. What do you think, Lynn?
Yeah, I think the importance of timely patching is both from a critical standpoint. Obviously, when there is a vulnerability, and again, SAP for customers and enterprise-wide, every vendor will publish vulnerabilities, right? So any given time, SAP has a Patching Tuesday. Everybody should know if they don't already. Every Tuesday, second Tuesday of the month, SAP releases what are critical vulnerabilities. And so the time is of the essence, because from the time you know that there's a vulnerability, identifying it, what is impacted, and then addressing that, meaning getting it patched so that you don't have this vulnerability that is known, is both a compliance issue, because let's say you're a public company and you know about this, but you didn't do it in a timely manner, and by some unexpected circumstance, you get attacked, right? You are now legally liable because you knew about it. It was proven that you know about it, but you didn't timely patch. So I think the importance of timely patching could not be emphasized enough, because patching is the other way around. It's not development where you address security from when you actually build in the architecture or the code. This is after the fact. You know that, you release something, it was not known, but now you know about it. So time is definitely, I think, the most critical thing about patching, right? That would be my first thing, is the
Especially
importance of timely patching.
Yeah, especially security patches, right? That there's a found vulnerability can expose your data, can expose the confidential information that we can have in the SAP systems, databases, anywhere. And as you said, if we don't patch fast enough, we're going to be liable if there is a compromise of that information. So just having the right procedures to be able to patch very quickly and don't make that patch a big project that disrupts the entire IT organization, I think is the best way to approach and be able to implement those patches and roll them out to production very quickly, which needs a lot of automation in my view. You have a complex system that needs to be up and running 24 hours a day, every day. You can't just be, Tuesday patching, I'm going to bring systems down on Tuesday so we can patch them. And Wednesdays, well, if there are any issues with the finance that we're working, just let us. The world doesn't work that way. So there is a big need for automation to make sure things are repetitive. And the more automation, the faster you can go, and the safer you can deploy those patches into production.
Yeah, I think from my experience with customers, it's like this, right? So most customers know best practice about schedule maintenance to do patching on a regular basis. Maybe it's once a month, once a quarter, whatever it is. But you will know that when it comes to anything related to security, it's emergency, right? It comes out and it's emergency. I got to put this. I can't wait for maintenance, schedule maintenance window. I have to take an emergency outage, and I get approvals, and I push it in. The reason is because it is very high log4j or something like that, right? So where I see the speed of organization to be able to push out emergencies, not like a regularly scheduled maintenance quarterly, is identifying what it impacts. So when a vulnerability comes out, the process of say, what system does it impact? Identify those. What systems is related to my business operations? And so you have to then coordinate with your business liaison and say, hey, we identify this vulnerability, we need to patch. This is going to impact these business systems. And those people would then have to be included as part of the approval process to say, hey, you know what? It's important. Let's schedule an outage tonight and impact. So even just determining that process alone will cut down the stress involved, because if you don't know what's impacting, you don't know what business systems, you don't know who to talk to, you have to have this prearranged so that you minimize the impact to business operations, right? So that's I think the critical. After having, yes, I have vulnerability, I need to patch, but then I need to identify this, and then on the people side, what process and how to minimize this disruption is becoming standard playbook in getting a document that says, business, you need to sign on and agree to us having ability to patch as emergency if there's critical nature. And once we identify this, we need a process to work through approvals and testing and all that stuff, and then identify a time and the resource to implement that. So I think that's a very critical part, right? And so the impact of the patching.
It's still, when we patch, we should not disrupt the business. So it's a critical. If it's critical, that means it needs to go fast. It doesn't mean, we can stop the business all the stores are going to close for today because we need to patch and nobody can check the warehouse and whether do we have any inventory or not. So critical means fast, not disrupting the business, in my view.
Yes.
So business are going to accept, yeah, that needs to be done very quickly. And yes, I'm impacted, so please patch the system, but I still need to operate. I still need to run the business, because otherwise the disruption is going to come from me stopping the business, not from the security.
Right. So I think in the speed, we can't avoid talking about automation, right? In order to speed things up, especially when you're in a large environment with many systems. So let's say, for example, you identify there was a SAP high priority security node that says, this vulnerability needs to be patched. Here's the version of the kernel that's affected. Here's the kernel version that needs to get patched to. Okay, so you know all that now, right? You're going to say, oh, that affects about 50 VMs in my production landscape that has 10 SAP production with 50 virtual machines and running all its applications. So now you got this thing where you got, okay, 50 machine. Oh my goodness, how am I going to do this speedy? Because my business say, yes, you can patch, but please hurry. I can't be down for more than, an hour, right?
Yeah.
So this is where we talk about the challenges of SAP patching. It's not like a web server. You just go patch and you restart, right? You've got component, you've got services. You need to also start them in the right order. Otherwise, you're gonna slam things down. You might have problem recovery. Maybe bringing back up systems is a problem also. So in the light of things, automation is kind of the key to expediting it, but also ensuring that whatever you're requesting for the outage, because it's a planned outage, because you're asking for it, you better stick to that, because otherwise you will slip your service level. And so I think the role of automation in patching is very critical, not only to deploy the patch, but first you have identify where to patch, like in sandbox first, and test it. How do I test it? Like if it's testing automation and all that. So we'll talk about testing as well. But I think the role of automation in patch management is one of the key differentiator on how you manage patching.
So if we break that, so there is a security patch coming is critical. First is we need to have a process where we identify that we are impacted by this security, where we need to patch, where are the areas at risk, et cetera, and get some sort of, this is an emergency, we want to do it, and we want to do it immediately, get that process. There's not much automation there. It's just a process of collaboration and understanding who the people need to be involved to make a quick decision. When the decision is made, we're going to go and we got to deploy that as soon as possible, whether it is this weekend better than next weekend, or if it's Monday better than Wednesday. Then is the automation on doing a regression test to make sure we don't break anything, and the automation that we solve for that vulnerability as well, which maybe we're not totally able to test the vulnerability, but at least that we introduce the fix and we don't break anything that it was working. And then is the automation of the deployment itself into all the systems, from development to all the way to production, right? So manual process with collaboration, automation on testing, and automation on deployment.
And I want to add one more to that, right? So for automation, I think automation actually needed even before that. So I guess you won't be surprised, but I guess some customer might be shocked to hear that in a large shop, they have no clue, like what system is impacted. Like for instance, if I said this security node has this vulnerability that impacts SAP Java and systems with this kernel release, right? And they would scramble, get a bunch of people and manually checking to see what system has this. They don't have the central information to tell them that, hey, if I put in this and tell me all the systems that are impacted, right? That is a kind of automation. If you don't have that in some kind of CMDB or LMDB or whatever automation or monitoring or inventory management assets, IT assets, then that process itself has to be manual, and that needs to get automated, because you cannot request system outages and business systems before having that information? How do you know what you're going to get impact or a patch? How many resources do you need unless you can identify the exact list of systems impacted? And so that's also the automation. So I think automation starts with information systems that determines what is impacted, what services are related, and then from there, okay, what do I need to do to deploy this patch? Of course, it's the patch download. What is the testing in a, let's say, pre-production environment? Patch it, run some automated testing, and then after that, getting sign off, and then go through the ticket approval for the right people in the chain to approve, and then deploy to production. So yes, there's automation in all these pieces, not just the end part where we talk about deploying a patch in automated manner.
How about customers that are leveraging the cloud services? Not just SAP RISE, because but other MSPs, right? So yeah, maybe the MSP is gonna be in charge of doing that initial risk evaluation and impact analysis. Me as a business, as a customer, I need to understand, I need to communicate with my businesses and so on. So just the fact that there's a security patch coming and I have services provided to me, it doesn't mean that I'm off the hook and I have no responsibility whatsoever. At the end of the day, it's my business. So there's going to be communications with my own internal business partners, as well as ensuring that the application still works, and maybe the MSP doesn't test that. So I need to test the business processes and so on, right? So
yeah. So there's a clear so-called RACI matrix or responsibility SLA between the managed service provider, and again, it doesn't matter if it's SAP RISE or traditional MSP that manage the system. And typically they would manage from, let's say, the OS, the hyperscaler, the kernel, so the SAP customer would say, hey, it's my business systems, I'm in charge of everything else, but you guys are responsible for the OS and all these things down. I can't touch the actual SAP executables. So there's a lot of coordination involved, especially when the process is more manual. So like I say, we talked about automation, but the process is that the managed service provider may have to be involved, because the reason is this: some patching requires reboot, some patching doesn't require reboot. Let's say a patching, just example, SAP kernel patch, which depends on a particular vulnerability being fixed at the OS level as well, right? So it's not only SAP. If it's come out that the Linux kernel, Red Hat or SUSE or whatever has a vulnerability that needs to be patched first, then the kernel depends on that being available, so the libraries are available to SAP. All of this, then you get down to a level where, okay, the OS has to get patched, and then SAP gets patched. So this definitely requires managed service provider to coordinate resource to patch the OS. And if they don't have an automation to do that through automatic channel of subscribe patches from the OS vendor, that's again a manual effort, right? So this level of, I know my business can give me this outage, I can patch SAP kernel, but then what happened to the OS, right? I need to coordinate all these reboots, and maybe some has live patching, some don't have live patching, depending on your OS and what you subscribe to pay for. Again, it can be a big coordination effort, not just at the SAP level. I've seen so many patch. If you don't patch, and again, I think SAP customer is a little bit of a special case, because I'd see, like, if you're running a web application and you typically will patch on a regular basis, you're running SAP, you can't patch the OS because it's dependent on SAP, and then that whole chain of approval means that the OS might not have been patched for the last 3 months, 6 months. Some I've seen even like a year. The OS, if you go run a Yum update or Yas update or whatever, there's like 1,000 patch for the OS alone, right? And so that to me is like, when you said talking about timely, SAP customer can't be ignorant to the fact that you might patch SAP, but the OS kernel you're running on is like severely vulnerable because you haven't patched in like a year, because you haven't given them any timeline to patch and reboot and all that, right? Because rebooting a system is serious business as well. That's another automation you need to think about is how do I stop SAP and all in the right sequence, and then patch the OS, and then I patch SAP that's dependent on the OS. So that whole thing where MSP come in, I would say you have to be MSP that is very aware of SAP. You can't just have generic MSP that say, oh, I run Linux and Windows and I just patch independently. No, SAP has to be part of that process because they have to understand I need to patch database first or app servers first or whatever, right? So that's why when we talk about challenges of patching SAP environment, it's encompassing. You have to understand the stack of SAP system. What are all the different components? What does it depend on? What sequence does it have to happen in? And then what can be automated, right? I mean, reviewing SAP note is not automated, right? A security note comes out, you need somebody to look at these and say, oh, there's like 20 nodes. I need to only take care of these 3 because I don't run these other components or whatever. I don't have CRM or maybe whatever. So I think that also is a process. Unless you have a dedicated person in an SAP landscape that is in charge of security, it's definitely you're going to be disadvantaged. When something come out, you're not going to be able to react in time.
So that means, in my view, the importance of communication, because in a large environment, the team responsible for patching the OS is probably going to be different from the team patching the SAP systems. And there's got to be true communication and collaboration. That we don't want to be in a situation that we restart SAP and all of a sudden it doesn't come back up properly because the system has been patched at the OS level. Now we have all sort of problems rebooting, restarting the systems and things like that. So I think when it becomes, large environment or multiple teams responsible for a different stack level patching, the importance of communication and alignment. So everybody knows when things are going to be patched.
You touch on a very important point, because I've seen customers, especially today, we have customers that we talk to the basis team and we talk about, application performance, availability, and all that sort of stuff. And then when we touch on anything related to the OS, because of the segregation of duty that's happened over the last, I'd say 10, 15 years, you've got this thing, they say, hey, we don't worry about that. That's the cloud engineer's job. They take care of all the OS. And, that actually is a big problem. It's like this, right? If you run a train station operation and you have like in the London Tube or the New York subways or whatever, you have people that are selling tickets, you have conductors, and you have, people just doing security. They can't be in a silo, right? They can't say, no, that's not my job. That's somebody else's job. It's like when they say at the airport, you see something, say something. Security, it's a shared responsibility. That means that if the SAP team is saying, that's their job to patch the OS, and whenever they do it on their schedule, no, it has to be a shared responsibility, because nobody has enough eyes. When it comes to security, nobody has enough eyes to take care of everything. You need the shared common goal that it has to be protected from the core. Everybody, people, process, and platform or technology has to be involved in this. And so if you segregate it down to silos, this is where the bad guys, they will exploit. They will exploit those gaps between teams. Oh, we know that, there is this vulnerability, but we know that, this is kind of in the gray zone, and these guys will point to that guy, and that guy will point to that guy, and then it's not taken care of. So I think on the softer side of patching management is this internal process that the customer must create in order to have, let's say, a bi-weekly team review between teams about what security things are important. Like for instance, if we're talking about things that are not even system related, maybe a social type of hack, like a MGM or something. You got the thing where it was nothing to do with the actual vulnerability. It was that the people were assuming that some guy asked for access and he's a trusted person, so I'm going to give him access. So there's a different level of social engineering altogether right now, that is not just purely about software vulnerability. But where do you put that in? That's a shared responsibility. So I think that one of the topic that I will have a podcast on is also related to this. It's called ransomware attacks, right? So it's a big topic right now. Ransomware is obviously things like MGM and all that, and it's cross between cybersecurity and also typical security awareness, right? But ransomware is very, very big because they can use social engineering on that side to get in and do all that stuff. But that's another topic. It's a big one. I think I'm excited. I've worked on ransomware projects before as well. So
we're gonna make a note for that to be in a separate episode.
So let's talk about how an SAP customer, I would like to say, if people don't already know. So I mentioned before about SAP security notes, and that's definitely something a person needs to be designated with a role that important of reviewing those security notes, because it can be overwhelming. Let's say for 1 month, you don't review security notes in environment. You get these bulletins from SAP. If you don't log on to, me.sap.com and you don't have a dashboard that says what security notes are there and what may be impacting, you are severely already in the black zone, right? You are so there has to be somebody, I say, in most teams that I've worked with, designate a part-time person or a full-time with some part-time role that their main job is to review security notes. Right. So that's the first thing. I think that's important to say that, right?
I actually think that maybe that role should not be part of the SAP basis team or whatsoever, and instead should be security team.
Right. A shared responsibility.
They check that as like, hey guys, this is found. What is your plan to make sure that you are going to fix this? Because there is this vulnerability being solved by SAP. When are you going to plan on implementing it? And that segregation of duties. Otherwise, everything comes to the SAP manager and say, okay, well, but we have this go live now. We cannot do it. I think the segregation will probably provide, visibility of the level of compliance with patching from OS, database, networks, everything in the stack, right? So there should be a dashboard of where it is the entire ecosystem being patched.
Let's talk about, after you already identify all the patching and everything that needs to be go on, realization of actual patch getting approved to go into production has many different aspects to it, like testing, and it can introduce new things, right? So you patch something, it breaks something else. So the impact of patches has to be looked at from testing for various different things. System stability, in performance, it may impact. We had issues where, let's say you update the kernel, and the kernel negatively impacts performance, right? So it's important for an enterprise system applications to understand what's your plan to address regression testing or performance validation, some basic level of checks to make sure that every time you deploy a patch in let's say, pre-production that's been refreshed, right? That again, another customer example is like, if you don't have systems that you could test in that represent production, that's a serious issue too. Because if the patch comes out, says production got to be patched, but I got nowhere to test to validate. Oh yeah, I can patch it, but I don't have any like system that's been recently refreshed with data that have a performance test suite that already automated to run through and say, yep, everything passed. Then you also at this question where I'm just going to hope for the best, patch, and then hopefully nothing breaks in production.
I think it's really all about risk, right? And do you want to invest in the resources or having and maintaining a separate environment so you can test everything? Or look, my SAP system is not that critical and I can assume the risk, and I'm going to take the risk of putting this into production because I do a bare bone core process checks, but I don't have the resources and the time to do a full performance test. So I'm going to take it that if it works in my quality environment, it's going to work in production, and assume that risk versus investing in a lot more. So I think it's at the end is the ideal environment, the ideal ecosystem, but also what is the criticality of that application and the resources that you have. I think that at least there should be a test of your core business processes that you cannot live without. And I remember back in the day, a long time ago, in a company, the core business was not SAP. The core business were the point of sales, because the point of sale would not work. We could not take money out of the customer's pockets. So the trucks could wait. So the warehouse, maybe they can wait for a couple of hours, but the tills, the point of sale, they had to work. You open the shop and that has to work. So I think it needs to be aligned with the business and identify what are your key business processes that you cannot not live without, and make sure you test them. Make sure you test from a functionality and performance.
It's a trade-off, right? So in a ideal world, you would have a pre-production that looks very much like production, and customers who actually invest in this can attest that it's invaluable, right? But if you can't afford to do that, you need to at least say, I need a minimum set of critical business transactions or end-to-end scenario interfaces, whatever I test, and I need to run through at least some level of this. And then also the time, right? Normally in patching, we don't recommend, like, for instance, just deploying it and then go straight to production. There is a burn-in time. So let's say, for instance, you compromise, you say, yes, this is critical, we know about it, we identify, but our process says we burn this in a test environment for 1 week, right? And we test, some key critical things, test some interface, and whatever your process is. Then after that burn-in time, then we will then move and promote to production. So this also is part of the patching strategy, and you need to document this, because it's not like I can immediately move stuff to production. No, patch went fine, but I need burn-in time. And that burn-in time is different for every customer, what it is, right? So I think this is part of the role of testing, patching management. It's a different discipline. Again, we might actually do another topic talking about podcasts in so-called automated testing, right? What automated testing suite will help you to automate your testing of iterative things that already, these are not new functionality, it's just running some regression and some performance. Like, for instance, if I ran a batch job in production for payroll processing, I need to run this because it's very important, and I need to make sure it runs in the same time, because if you patch something and that broke that job and people are not going to get paid, people are going to be very upset. So I think the role of testing is very important, and I think we can definitely do in some other aspect of another podcast about automation play in the testing world. But I think for this, I want to get back to one other topic that I think we talked about. Is scanning. Not everything is software. So let's say, for instance, if I don't have to patch, but what if there's a configuration? So the security note might come out and say that this configuration parameter that you configure, we found this to be vulnerable, right? Let's say something that needs to be closed is open, something that needs to be open is closed. So the role here is not only to patch the software, but scan for configuration. So for instance, if I say, search me all my systems where this setting is set, and that has been identified by the software vendor to be a vulnerability. Because if you incorrectly configure something, for instance, a very cloud open thing is like, if I have, let's say, I'm just give example, right? AWS S3 bucket, and you mistakenly configure it to be wide open security-wise. You've just opened up to the internet all of your storage, right? And you might have security documents, you have all kinds of sensitive, maybe you're a biotech, you have some FDA that's being submitted for approval, and now you open up to all your competitor. So this is a vulnerability. It doesn't mean like security from that aspect of something malicious, but actually can be data leak, can be compliance related, legal related. And this might come down to only a configuration that you're not aware of, but the vendor publish something and say, hey, you need to make sure that these settings are set to like not public. So what I say is there has to be some way to always scan your application for these known security settings. If you set it a certain way, not recommended by the vendor, then you need to elevate that and say, hey, because somebody's setting, when you change it, you need to also maybe restart. Not all of them are live, right? So I think in the context of security, patching is one thing, but patching may involve that after you patch, you need to set this kernel parameter or need to set this application parameter, right? And how do you do that in terms of how do you know which one system is set or not set? That's also important. I think it comes down to actual monitoring and configuration management.
Indeed. Part of the patch, for sure, part of the patching process, whether there is only software or software plus configuration, and the complexity of identifying which systems you need to, as your footprint and number of system increases, the complexity, it's just overwhelming if you don't have any level of automation.
So the good news here is that this has been around. We're not talking about new topics here, but I think the good news in all of this is there are approaches and automation and tools and process to help customers deal with it, whether you're in a fully, managed environment by yourself, or you are half managed by managed service provider, or maybe you are a RISE customers. There are all these scenarios that could be addressed from tooling, from people, process, and technology, obviously. And I'll give you an example, like there are tools to manage, for instance, automated patching for kernel, OS kernel, live patching. There are rolling kernel update from SAP to minimize impact of app servers being all unavailable at the same time. All of these things need some level of understanding, and there are tooling and process. So feel free to reach out or comment or let us know how we can help. But essentially, the patching topic is important in the sense that you have to do it, you can't avoid it. So if you're going to do it, follow best practices, have process and people in place, identify it ahead of time, and that will reduce the stress and also the kind of, I would say, compliance risk that you have. And then from that point on, everything is managed as an ongoing. It's not going to be done once and then forget about it, right? It is a iterative process. So therefore, you need tools that will help you go through this speedily, from identification to deploying to testing, and then to check and make sure that you are compliant. And then obviously some business might also need to report compliance. So how do you report that you have applied these patches? The systems show the right versions, and et cetera, et cetera. So all of this is very important, because you don't want to wait till the end of the year and you have a compliance audit from an external auditor and you fail these, especially for a public company.
So I think the key is make this part of your operations. Make patching, security patching, part of your operations, and not a one-off type of thing, initiative that you need to reinvent the wheel every time that you need to do it, because you're going to be inefficient, you're going to disrupt the business, you're not going to patch correctly, you're going to miss systems, etc. But trying to invest in resources to make this as part of your operations, that every operations team is going to have to patch. So make that a robust process to make sure you can repeat that process over and over and over.
Absolutely. So with that, I think we can wrap up. This has been a very, I think, dialogue-full topic. I think it's not going to be the last time, but we'll branch off many topics already. We talked about testing automation. We talked about monitoring. We talked about auto deployment and all of this. So there's other cybersecurity topics as well. So I'd love to follow up on other topics. But for our audience, thank you for tuning into our Tekitok podcast again. And feel free to comment, give us feedback, or suggest other topics that you'd like to hear from experts. Until next time, thank you very much, Jordi.
Thank you, Linh. Thank you, everyone.
Bye-bye.